Somehow I have a feeling the answer is going to be about vibration. But I'll go ahead.
Next.
And my question is two parts. But first is, if we are all light beings and positive energy when we incarnate, then how do we explain someone like Hitler and the Holocaust, or somebody like Jeffrey Dahmer?
Well, those extreme, and people often don't want to hear this, because once as a person or as a society, you have found someone that you are comfortable in identifying and condemning, then the stories of condemnation feel better to you than the stories of forgiveness or of understanding. But these people that you are describing here, and we imagine that there's an even longer list somewhere, are not different from any of you in that they were source energy coming in.
Yeah.
They explored contrast, and out of the contrast they were asking for more. But when someone displays these heinous acts, when someone is murderous or the causer of much destruction, and far less than that, what it means every single time is that while their vortex is here and calling them in a very big way, they're not going. In other words, they probably had ringing in the ears before they started killing people. We're not kidding you. In other words, the evidence of their discord was there. But when life keeps causing you to expand, and the beliefs that you hold, that you're taught, that you're held to, don't let you take the expansion, the discord just gets greater and greater and greater, until there are people. Now, you offered two extremes, and they are quite different in vibrational nature, the two that you offered. But let's take the case of Hitler.
Yes.
So as his life, like all of yours, caused him to expand and expand and expand, because he was not in the vicinity of the vortex, and because he did not get into the vortex, which would have brought him into elation and given him the feeling of satisfaction and giving him the feeling of expansion and well-being and growth that he wanted. It's like accolade is the wrong word, because when you come into alignment, you just know your value. When you're out of the vortex and you want to know your value and you don't know your value, then you offer all kinds of behavior in order to shore up your value. And so that's why the most insecure, the most disappointed, the most self-blaming, the most self-loathing are those that offer the most heinous behavior, because in their the more they are not who they are, the worse they feel in not being who they are, and the more the opposite of who they are begins to occur to them in terms of behavior. It's a big subject, and
It's huge.
and this is a subject where our audiologists, we would imagine, would not want to go into this conversation with most people, because most people, as we said, are much more comfortable in just putting bad people in the bad pile and just leaving them there. In other words, I'm just more comfortable hating you. But the problem with that is, as you're more comfortable hating them, that means you've trained yourself to be more comfortable outside the vortex. Because the source within you does not hate them. Does not. And that's a little uncomfortable for many humans. They say, well, something's screwy with the source that Abraham's talking about, because I'm sure that my God is a vengeful God. And we say, spoken by someone outside the vortex. In other words, we promise you that that which is source is love. And it's only outside of that. It's only outside of that sort of behavior can be offered.
So I suppose my question then is, why the extreme behavior then?
Well, here's a good way of describing this. You may, if you've been listening to us for a while, you may have heard us say this before. Jerry and Esther, as they were traveling a great deal between Phoenix and San Diego, would get out in the desert about halfway, and they wanted to be in San Diego, but it was a 400-mile drive. If they had become so disappointed about not being where they wanted to be that they got disoriented about where they actually were. So they turned around and went back to Phoenix. So it's Phoenix, Yuma, Phoenix, Yuma, Phoenix, Yuma, Phoenix, Yuma, Phoenix, Yuma, never getting to where they're going. So the reason that we like this analogy so much is because people who are in despair, and we are not really equating Phoenix with despair, but no analogy is perfect in that way. But so a person who is in despair, who feels utter disempowerment, when they move into revenge, they feel better because revenge is less resistant than powerlessness. Anger is less resistance than revenge. Frustration is less resistance than anger, and hope is less resistance than frustration, and belief is less resistance than hope, and knowing is less resistance than believing. Even though believing and knowing are both inside the vortex, one has a little more resistance in it than the other. And so if you have been someone who felt powerless, and if you are privy to the historical, personal recollections of people who were up close to serial killers and things of that nature, you hear again and again their abusive childhood, the way they were put down, the way they were made to feel unworthy or inappropriate. And so over time, even though the source within them is calling them, if the people, most people don't mean to do it, but you do it to your children, when you make your children understand that what you feel about what they do should matter to them.
Yes.
And so you train them away from their own awareness of their own emotions by making how you feel more important, even though you're not always there and you're not even close to consistent, where the source within them is always consistent. So here's this person who has been, over time, his connection to source has eroded to the degree, and you got to understand, when you are born as source and your connection erodes, you suffer. And the more you suffer, the more you ask. But the more you ask, if you don't go, then the more you suffer. And the more you suffer, the more you ask, until they just parlay it into something that is so extreme. These are extremes, you see. And they are usually people who focus. They're usually people who focus insatiably. So they have a sort of chronic vibrational stance. So source is calling them, but they don't go. And source is calling them, and they don't go. And source is calling them, and they don't go. So they make it often to revenge because source is calling them, but then society condemns them. It started out with their mother, then their teachers. You're punished for your display of anything less than being contrite. And so, but they don't feel contrite. They feel powerful. They want to be heard. They know they have something to say. We're talking of all of you, just not these kinds of people that you are describing here. And so then you go back to powerlessness in the beginning. Then you make it to revenge, and then someone doesn't let that go, and so then you go back to powerlessness. And so it's a syndrome of powerless to revenge, powerless to revenge, powerless to revenge, until your highest emotion, the highest emotion that you seem capable of because of the environment in which you live, is one of revenge. It's no wonder they behave in the way they do. You would too. If you had a pillow pressed against your face, you would become less than contrite. If someone were to press a pillow against your face, you would find strength you didn't know you have. You would find vocabulary that you don't often speak. In other words, you would rise to your survival. And we know it sounds strange, and it's why you don't want to talk about it to everyone, because there are so many people that just want to put bad people in bad piles and lock the door and throw away the key and just leave them there. We're just saying that when you focus upon those bad piles and you feel justified in your hatred toward them, you use them as your excuse to not be in your vortex. And that awful feeling that you feel that you call hate or loathing is your indicator that you are separating yourself by virtue of this subject from who you really are and what the source within you feels and knows.